had on him on foreign policy. No, I would do pretty much the opposite. I don't like the isolationism of not talking to people. I was drafted in 1962 at the height of the Cold War when the missiles were in Cuba. And the Cold War is over. And I think we propped up Castro for 40-some years because we put on these sanctions, and this only used us as the scapegoat. He could always say anything wrong, it's the United States' fault. But I think it's time to quit this isolation business of not talking to people. We talked to the Soviets, we talked to the Chinese, and we opened up trade. We're not killing each other now. We fought with the Vietnamese for a long time. We finally gave up, started talking to them. Now we trade with them. I don't know why the Cuban people should be so intimidated. Brett, I don't know where you get this assumption that all of a sudden all the Cubans are coming here. I would thought they were going to celebrate and they're going to have a lot more freedom if we would only open up our doors and say, we want to talk to you and trade with you and come visit. Sometimes they can't even send packages down there. I think we're living in the dark ages when we can't even talk to the Cuban people. I think it's not 1962 anymore, and we don't have to use force and intimidation and overthrow in governments. I just don't think that's going to work.
Senator Santorum, an admittedly cynical question.
Because the question was, would you go to war? And Mitt said he would go to war. But you have to think about the preliminary act that might cause them to want to close the Straits of Hormuz, and that's a blockade. We're blockading them. Can you imagine what we would do if somebody blockaded the Gulf of Mexico? That would be an act of war. So the act of war has already been committed, and this is a retaliation. But besides, there's no interest whatsoever for Iran to close the Straits of Hormuz. I mean, they need it as much as we do. I mean, so you have to put that in a perspective. But this whole idea that we have to go to war because we've already committed an act by blockading the country, and I don't see. And I think Newt is right. I think he's wrong about World War II. I think the people were ready because we did it properly and we declared it and we won it quickly. But no, the people are not ready. We don't have any money. We have too many wars. The people want to come home, and they certainly don't want a hot war in Iran right now. And I think that would be the most foolish thing in the world to do right now is take on Iran.
Right now, the
answer is similar, but a little bit different, because at the national level, obviously, we have to have one language. I mean, we can't have multiple languages. So for legal reasons, we would have one language. But our system really gives us a way to be more generous, because if Florida wanted to have some ballots in Spanish, I certainly wouldn't support a federal law that would prohibit Florida from accommodating, a city election or a local election or a state election. I think that's the magnificence of our system, where you can solve some of these problems without dictating one answer for all states. But nationally, we should have one language.
Speaker Gingrich.
The Everglades provide 1 in 3 Floridians with their drinking water. It affects thousands of jobs. Right now, there's a joint federal-state program to save what's left of the Everglades. Would you commit to continuing that federal financing of the Everglades preservation?
Sure. I don't see any reason to go after that. I would still look into the details on whether that could be a state issue or not. But with all the wars going on and the economy is in shambles as it is, and the unemployment, to worry about dealing with that program, we could do it in a theoretical sense, but I would see no reason to, complicate things. But I wouldn't have any desire to interfere with that.
At this point, we'll take another break. We'll return.
View of the Terry Schiavo case.
Mm-hmm. I find it so unfortunate. It's so unusual, too. That situation doesn't come up very often. It should teach us all a lesson to have living wills, or a good conversation with a spouse. I would want my spouse to make the decision, but it's better to have a living will. But I don't like going up the ladder. We go to the federal courts and the Congress and on up. Yes, difficult decisions. Will it be perfect for everybody? Not. But I would have preferred to see the decision made at the state level. But I've been involved in medicine with things similar, but not quite as difficult as this. But usually we deferred to the family, and it wasn't made a big issue like this was. This was way out of proportion to what happens more routinely. But I think it should urge us all to try to plan for this and make sure either that one individual that's closest to you makes the decision, or you sign a living will, and this would have solved the whole problem.
Beth?
Governor Romney.
Insufficiently conservative for you?
Well, I think that the problem is nobody's defined what being conservative means.
Go ahead.
And I think that is our problem. Conservatives means we have smaller government and more liberty. And yet, if you ask what have we done, I think we've lost our way completely. Our rhetoric is still pretty good, but when we get in charge, we expand the government. You talk about Dodd-Frank, but we gave them Sarbanes-Oxley. We gave debts as well, when we're in charge. So if it means limited government, you have to ask a basic question: what should the role of government be? The founders asked that question, had a revolution, wrote a constitution. And they said the role of government ought to be to protect liberty. It's not to run a welfare state and not to be the policeman of the world. And so if you're going to conservative, how can you be conservative and cut food stamps, but you won't cut spending overseas? There's not a nickel or penny that anybody will cut on the conservative side overseas spending, and we don't have the money. They're willing to start more wars. So I say if you're conservative, you want small government across the board, especially in personal liberty. What's wrong with having the government out of our personal lives? So this is what we have to decide: what conservative mean, what limited government means. And I have a simple suggestion. We have a pretty good guide, and if we follow the Constitution, government would be very small, and we would all be devoted conservatives.
Governor Romney again tonight.